While we're waiting for folks to finish joining, great to see everybody this morning. Thank you in advance to our panelists for joining. I'm Ryan Schoenfeld, co-founder and CEO of HiveWatch. Today's webinar is about disparate systems, and we'll define and get into the weeds on what all that means. Before we get started, just a couple of quick housekeeping items. First, this webinar is going to be recorded. So if you're on, you will get a link to the recording shortly after the webinar ends. And we'll also be sending it out to folks who registered but could not make it today. In terms of questions, please feel free to leverage the chat or the Q&A section. We have programmed in time today to make sure that we get to the Q&A. If we don't get to everything, periodically we get more than we can handle in a session. We will make sure to get back to you on your questions following today's session. So without further ado, let's jump into intros real quick, and we'll be off to the races. I'll start and then let the panelists introduce themselves. I'll be your moderator for today. Ryan Schoenfeld, co-founder and CEO of HiveWatch, and we're a product for GSOC operating and tying disparate systems together. So this is a topic that's really near and dear to our hearts. But I come from the industry by way of law enforcement, was a Fortune 500 end user running global security and safety technology, security consultant, and then crossed over to the dark side and started a software company. I will hand it over to Ben.
How are you doing? Ben Coleman, Head of Protective Services, Travel and Response at Meta. I manage the security for about 170 members of leadership across the globe, and also crisis response. Background is in executive protection, as well as global security, managed global security in oil and gas, entertainment. Also had a chance to manage travel a little bit. I'll pass it on to Jonathan.
Thanks, Ben. Hey, everybody. My name is John Brooks. I'm the head of global security at Alkermes Pharmaceuticals. We're a relatively small, about 1,800 person, 800 employee biopharmaceutical company operating in both the US and Ireland. I've been with the company about 18 months in the process of creating a new program, basically from the ground up. I also have my career spans both the public and private sector across multiple different business sectors, as well as with the US federal government.
Thanks, John. Mike?
Thanks, Ryan. I'm Mike Maxey. I'm the co-founder and general manager of Genea's security product division. So we help global companies manage access control, visitor management, for their physical sites and locations on a global basis.
Awesome. So I want to start super basic and maybe with a little bit of a softball, but just to get the conversation going and start to define what disparate systems means, because I think it's a vague term. I know we use it quite a lot. And I think a lot of times it gets used in the context of access control and video, which, are to me table stakes in a security program. But I think systems and data and interoperability extends far beyond access control and video. And so I'd love to hear from each of the panelists in regard to what they do with their company. And I think we tried to get a pretty good cross-section of roles and responsibilities from our panelists. What types of systems are you looking at in your organization, and what does disparate systems mean to you? And let's just go in the same order for now. And Ben, I'll hand it to you first.
I was afraid you were going to do that.
Yeah, sorry, you lost that lottery.
For me, disparate systems, when I hear that, I hear silos. And that's something that we try to avoid, right? Just about everything we do, we collaborate across the board to build and grow and support people. Some of the systems I'm looking at, I'm always looking at where's my database to hold the information, and what systems can it talk to, and not just within security, but across the company.
And when you say your database, we're talking like data lake and sort of common place where different systems feed info to, or what do you mean by that?
I'm looking at basically the data source of information. right, that can feed into other systems. So I've taken a different approach to kind of the executive protection, where we're actually capturing all the data on all the details, and we went broad. The name of the person we're supporting, what type of service they have, the start date, end date, the advance date, the end of the advance, all of that data, and then we turn around and pull it into dashboards where we can analyze it a bit better. But then there's other sources that we'll pull in. For example, I may want to see the percentage of travel across the company. What percentage is this executive protection supporting? Well, I need to pull in that travel data to actually be able to see that. So building a system to where it talks to other systems, or having something that centralizes that data, so the systems can seem like they're talking.
Awesome. We'll come back to that because I have a bunch of questions. John?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned a couple of the baseline, right? When people start talking about disparate systems, they go to access control, they go to video, CCTV systems. I think those are certainly important. Those are certainly baseline. There's a lot of opportunities or missed opportunities that you can leverage or not leverage, not be in a position to leverage if you have disparate systems. So, but beyond that, I mean, I think some couple of things that come to mind, your visitors, who's coming onto your site that maybe aren't captured in your employee access control system. A lot of companies, a lot of organizations have a separate visitor management system. And then incident data or case management, I think, is another key system to keep in mind, right? Whether that's at what I would consider the incident level, right? Your first line, your security, your uniform security guard staff that are maybe logging incidents that could then turn into a case, which, I would consider a more prolonged, maybe there's an investigative component that in terms of a differentiator. But if you're capturing that in a silo at each different site, then those are disparate databases that you're not able to pull in insights if you've got similar problems across multiple sites, if you've got repeat offenders at multiple sites. So those are a couple other systems that I think come to mind that are very important to think about bringing together, or at least having a way to federate that data across those systems.
Yeah, and for us on the when I hear disparate systems, the thing that comes to mind is interoperability, right? The changing need for those systems to interoperate together. So if you have a visitor management system, making sure that guests can get access to facilities during constrained windows, or employees can get access to book conference rooms or entire facilities on an on-demand basis. Or when you get a door held alarm, door force alarm, does it have video that's tied to it so you can start an investigation and remediation, right? All of this is about interoperability, because we're constantly seeing that our customers are tasked with doing more with less, right? Solving for harder and more complex use cases with the same resources. And all of that is really heavily dependent on the interoperability of systems.
Mike, I think one of the the use cases that I hear a lot that I think about when I think of you all is the ever elusive single card solution. And I think, probably not a week goes by that we don't hear an end user talking about the card that they have to use to get through the landlord's building. And then they've got the card to get into their space. And when employees travel, they've got the stack of multiple cards. I think while it's annoying and a difficult use case for those employees, I think there's also a lot of downstream ramifications of those systems operating in silos, both programmatically, data-wise, budget-wise, and we'll start getting into some of those. But is that something that you all see and hear a lot?
Of course, every day, right? That's why that's a question I'm helping customers solve on a daily basis. But I think it really highlights why having interconnected systems is so critical, and then also understanding the fundamentals that those systems are built on. Because when you talk about the use case of getting a single card to work in every tenant landlord system that you occupy, understanding how card formats work, understanding what RAM is and what memory is really helps you understand how to solve those problems and what's possible, right? Because if your building in New York uses an AMAX system that has 50 other tenants that are relying on it, and they each have, different card formats, that interoperability question will require a very different solution than just saying port all of my users and cards into that system. Like, you're going to run into the memory limitations of that controller. You're going to have card format complications, right? So maybe you do need to go to a digital solution or an on-demand solution for access to disparate buildings that you're not home located at. And that's, I think, again, where our systems like HiveWatch, right, can come into play, and also of the challenges that enterprise customers have to face and think about on a very deep level.
So I want to jump out of security specific for a second and talk a little bit about the business of security. And I'm fortunate enough to know all of our panelists and have had these conversations individually. But I think one of the things I appreciate about Ben and John from a business standpoint is how they've both leveraged data to talk to the business about the business of security. And so I'd love to lean on you guys here for a second and talk a little bit about how you've used data from disparate systems or just systems in general to help other departments within the organization, whether it's talking about space utilization or facilities data, or where other departments have said, hey, Ben, you've got a pretty big data lake of stuff. Like, can you get us this data? Or John, where you've gone to the business and said, hey, we can make these financial decisions based on actual data rather than the traditional model of saying, everything is risk-based. And it's not that that's not important, but a lot of business leaders don't speak risk, they speak business. And so I'll let you guys, John, we'll go to you first this time. You're welcome, Ben. And what say you?
Yeah, I mean, the baseline, I think, of the takeaway here, what I would point out is that you've hit it right. I mean, the topic of this block here that we're talking about is running your security organization like a business. And what that means is you have to operate and talk like the business. So, in a boardroom, when your executive committee is discussing a possible merger, an acquisition, a strategic business decision, that with huge financial ramifications, they're talking about that in the context of having data, right? Having financial models, talking about what the weighted average cost of capital and all these things that we're not going to get into, that I myself don't even understand, couldn't tell you how to do it, but I understand that is the model, and I understand that is the framework. So knowing that, I think you're going to be much more successful if you are speaking to them about your security program, whatever initiative you're trying to justify, gain stakeholder support for, if it's a new program, if you're trying to say, hey, we need budget to mitigate this risk. Well, you can't just say, there's this risk out there, and if we don't do something about it, it's going to hurt us. That's not going to be a winning strategy. So I think you absolutely have to talk in terms of the way they talk, and the way to do that, and what I've found success with, is having data, coming to the table with data to tell your story. A couple of examples I can give real quick. In a former role with a different company, we had a public facing part of the business that accounted for, we were able to say, at a high level, that particular business unit accounted for, upwards of about 98% of all of our workplace violence cases. Well, we were able to adequately say that, and we could break that percentage down into, potential violence, cases of actual violence, threats, no threats, what time of day, what day of the week, right? We were able to cut, slice, and dice that data. Where that's important is that when that particular business unit making decisions, right, that have a financial impact, we were able to get them to justify adding an additional headcount specific to that business unit. We were able to have them be able to inform them on their capital expenditure allocations year over year for enhanced security measures for a particular location. So we would not have been able to do any of those things if we weren't coming to them with some actual data to tell that story.
And Ben, I'll ask you this in a second too, but John, who do you think needs to be at the table to hear the presentation? And I think you and Ben are in different situations where you're starting to build a program from the ground up. Ben's in a big company with a very big established program. I'm curious if the answers are different in terms of who needs to be at the table for that.
Well, I think the answers are likely going to be different from company to company, even if you're in the same sector, right? Ben is in tech, I'm in pharmaceuticals. I think though, if Ben were to speak to his colleagues at other tech companies, I know certainly my colleagues at other pharma companies, that answer likely could be different because each company is different. So I think you really have to understand the dynamics and the current situation of your company, right? What are the current circumstances? What is the culture? All of those. What are the current conditions? Are you just recently undergoing M&A? Is M&A on the table? Are you looking at is that company or the sector looking at a significant contraction coming up, right, due to market conditions? I think all of those things play into it that you have to understand and identify, which will then inform who needs to be at the table.
And before I hand it off to you, Ben, just a reminder here for everybody, if you have questions, there's a Q&A section at the bottom where you can drop your questions, and we'll be sure to get to them along the way. All right, Ben, you're up.
So what I will say, established company, yes, but I was where John was 6 years ago. So John, I don't envy the long hours and hard work you have to put in here. But I will say, no matter what you're responsible for, you have to run your business unit like you're the CEO of that, right? So if you're just a small section of security or the entire security department, you're the CEO of that. And so running that, you want to make sure you have the data and are able to answer questions when asked and not get into the weeds of, like John was talking about, there's a risk here that'll impact us. Well, what does that mean to me is what the leadership of the company wants to know. And if you can't explain that to them, if you can't CYA, can you articulate, then it won't matter. You can have the best idea, best program you want to put forth, but if you can't communicate that up, you won't get the support that you need. So treat it like you're the CEO of that business unit. Any chance you get to tie your data to anybody else's data across the company, do it, because that makes you more integrated with the business as opposed to saying, no, security stands over here. Right. That's kind of why I talked about the percentage of travel that we actually support for the entire company. Right. Anytime I can tie my data to someone else's, I do that. You have to quantify and qualify everything. Tell the story. I can't say that enough. And the metrics are not the begin and end of the story. So the qualifying of those things matters as well. But yeah, and answer questions. Be prepared to answer questions. And come away with a thank you instead of more questions. If you came away with more questions, then you didn't quite do your job. But if you come away with that thank you, you pretty much gave them all the information they needed and maybe more.
Who are you telling your story to, Ben?
Anybody that will listen. Because I don't know who's going to be my next advocate, right? So I'm talking to HR, I'm talking to legal, I'm talking to facilities, I'm talking to the C-suite. Anybody that'll listen, anybody that wants to sit down and talk to me, I'm talking to some of the executive admins.
Yeah, I think that's an important point, and something that I think gets missed a lot from these conversations is that security leaders, a lot of them did a really good job during COVID, for example, which was, I think, an accelerator for a lot of programs in terms of getting a seat at the table and the ability to provide impactful data to these organizations that they could use, whether it was their duty of care programs, it was return to office programs, it was real estate, taking a look at the real estate footprint and determining what footprint do we actually need? What are we going to shut down? Where do we need services? I think some people did better than others in terms of maintaining that seat at the table. But I think you're right that it is about storytelling, and it's about storytelling in a way that resonates and is impactful based on the persona of the person that's on the other side of the table. And I think that's where things get lost, because I think sometimes you do get the thank you, but it's like a glazed over thank you versus somebody who is engaged in the conversation and asking the right questions, and like you actually satisfied the information that they needed, versus I just don't want to have this conversation anymore. So thank you. So let's say we're doing a good job of getting our systems sort of integrated together. But I think part of our job as security leaders and thinking about the business of security is thinking about the future and future proofing. How do you all approach that future proofing conversation, especially when talking about making significant financial investments and saying, hey, this doesn't just solve a problem today, but this solves a problem for the future, or this helps solve multiple problems for the future. And the reason I asked the question is because I think a lot of organizations over the years have bought a lot of individual point solutions. And what that means is, hey, we had this critical problem. And in sales, maybe we call that a compelling event, but like some security incident happened, and all of a sudden now that's a high priority for our leaders. And so we're going to go get a solution that solves that sort of narrowly focused problem, or we're going to throw some guards at that problem because that's how we've always done it before. And instead of coming back and revisiting it, it just sort of stays, and all of a sudden it compounds. And over the years, we've got 10, 20, 50, 100 different solutions that do a thing, but not actually like a cohesive program or offering. And so like, how do you approach those, number one, high priority challenges when they come up, to say, okay, understood that that's a problem and that's a priority, and we're going to solve it, but we're not just going to solve it sort of in that silo and create another silo, but we're going to think more holistically about how we're going to leverage this on a broader go forward basis. Those are really a lot of words in that question, and I apologize. But whoever wants to take the first stab at it, don't all jump at once.
I guess I'll go ahead and go since it was pretty quiet. I will say that comes down to some of the conversations that I have with some of my partners, right? One, let's look at the direction of the company. Two, let's read the 10K. What is the company saying are the risks that they're concerned about going forward in the first section, right? Then you start talking to some of your partners, like you start talking to HR and saying, hey, we can put this in place, but here's the precedent that we're setting, right? So is this a short-term solution or a long-term solution here? Then you start looking at that, and you'll get questions, and understand you're getting results from the things that you have been doing. And you're not doing anything wrong. There's efficient and there's more efficient. And so it's, hey, listen, we are doing this, but we want to become more efficient. And then once you become more efficient, we become even more efficient. And then you're always moving in that direction. So you're always looking at will the program be better? And what's the direction of the company guides a lot of that.
Yeah. Well, and future proofing is so critical for many reasons, but I think it ties really closely back to the last point that we were discussing about sort of communicating the value of security within the organization. Security is really a nexus of a few different things, like employee experience, compliance, and both of those are critical to the revenue of a business, right? I don't have the exact number off the top of my head, but I believe it's about 32% revenue increase for companies that can retain 98% or more of their employees, right? If you have high turnover, you're going to have reduced revenue. And security, enabling a delightful employee experience at every physical interaction with the company, whether it's traveling to the New York office or the Santa Monica office, right? When they get to badge in with their, company branded employee credential, that is critical to playing a role in the employee satisfaction, right? Is it easy to get a conference room, right? Just like IT, right? If your laptop's always crashing, if you can never get connected to a meeting, if you're, never able to actually do a demo because PowerPoint or whatever application you're using is crashing, you're not going to be as successful at that company. So IT and security are not necessarily seen in that light of being directly tied to revenue, but I think they're directly enabling revenue through employee experience. And of course, compliance is another part of that, right? If you're not ISO 27001 compliant, a lot of customers can't buy from you. And physical security is a big component of compliance. So now tying that to future proofing, right? So I think there's obviously a recognition of the role that security can play in the business outcomes for a company. But it's ultimately a lot of times a CapEx, right? Whether it's installing cameras or panels or whatever it is. And the more future-proofed the products you're buying are, the less CapEx you're going to have to continue to incur, which again improves, the bottom line of businesses. And I think the reason that this current macro environment is really helping security professionals have that conversation is because we went through a huge transition of everyone only looking at top line revenue to now looking at EBITDA and bottom line, right? So if the more that security professionals can do to reduce expenditures, that increases the bottom line of a company, which is right now the most in vogue metric for everyone to look at, right? When you talk about 10Ks, people aren't necessarily looking at top line revenue growth now. They're now looking at how is net profitability, and security, of course, plays a key role in that.
John?
Yeah, what I was going to say is I think if anyone, as a security practitioner, if you're looking at your solutions across the board, right, all the programs in your toolbox, if you're looking at them and thinking of them as one-dimensional, you're doing it wrong. So, for example, access control. Access control system is not just to facilitate access for your employees into the building, in and out of the building, and to keep people who you don't want out. Yes, that's what it does. That's also an investigative tool. That's also an emergency response tool, right? To be able to, if it's configured properly, understanding in a crisis, in an emergency, who you need to target, who's your distribution list for who you need to account for in an emergency, right? That would be point number one, right? And on down the list. Everything that you do, you need to be thinking of what all can this address. That's how I approach things, especially starting out with limited budget, just gaining budget, getting acceptance for new things that didn't exist before. Everything I'm bringing to the table, I'm thinking of, well, yes, this can solve this problem for me, but what problem can this solve for HR? What problem can this solve for legal? What problem can this solve for EHS? And I think if you think of it that way, you're going to be more successful than just saying, oh, I have a problem, I have a security problem, and I need to go find a security solution.
And I think that transitions nicely to my question about ROI. So as security leaders, you spend money, and security has historically been thought of as a cost center. But putting your business leader hats on, how do you measure ROI for yourself and your program? And how do you message that and pitch ROI internally within your organizations? All right, John, I'm calling on you first.
Yeah, that's fine. I'll take a first pass at this. So again, I think it comes down to having the data, right? So for example, I have been doing stakeholder interviews, getting input on what is their input, what is their perception of current state, what do they see as top priorities, et cetera. One of the things that had come out of that is, hey, we think tailgating, right? Tailgating seems to be a significant issue. Okay, well, that's great. That's good info. But at this point, it's anecdotal. I don't have any data to help me quantify how big of an issue that really is. So in order for me, what I would like to do is, obviously I'm going to target that as being something I need to mitigate. But in order to tell that value story, I want to understand what's our baseline problem, like what's our baseline percentage of tailgate incidents that happened over the course of a day, over a week, et cetera, a month. And then if I put in a solution to monitor that and be able to take steps to mitigate that, I want to be able to show, since we did that, we were able to reduce our percentage of tailgate incidents down by X percentage, right? I think if you're able to do that, that goes to being able to tell that value proposition story in a much more efficient manner, which gets you to that. Now you're talking about, you can begin to quantify that ROI.
And I think to maybe take that even a step further, you're in a regulated business. And so my guess is that compliance has, like tailgating has a specific issue when it comes to compliance and how that translates to business and operations and fines and things like that, beyond just saying that tailgating's bad. Is that a fair statement?
Correct. Yeah, especially if you're talking about access into a controlled environment, such as a manufacturing suite, controlled substance areas, et cetera. So lab spaces, absolutely.
Yeah.
Ben, how do you pitch ROI?
So everything John said, and then some, right? So you have to change the perspective of security in people's minds by doing everything John is talking about, being that problem solver, being their solution-oriented person or department, which then you start to be looked at as a strategic partner versus a tactical department, right? Where security is just here to keep people safe with the gates and everything. No, I'm actually here to consult and provide advice and information on everything across the board that can support protection of people, assets, facilities, everything across the board, help the business protect itself and grow. So changing that mentality of looking at security as a strategic partner versus a tactical department is how you help drive that ROI conversation.
You mentioned tailgating, John. I think that one's not a planned question here, but something that's top of mind for me, as like one of the things that we do is tailgating detection. And I always think it's interesting how different companies think about approaching a new program like that. You know, historically for tailgating specifically, we've seen companies add turnstiles. We've seen companies add guards to doors. We've seen some companies that do both of them. But when you start doing system-based detection for tailgating, there's a lot of stuff that goes into what you're actually doing with that. And I think part of the question is, okay, are we using it to build metrics? Are we using it for enforcement? Are we using it to like change something in the program? And is it safe to assume, because I see this periodically, that like there's other partners that have to get involved if you're doing more than just data collection, if you're going to contact employees based on their behavior, if you're going to try to drive a change in behavior, if you're going to take enforcement action towards employees and their guests and your contractors. How complex is that in your organizations to get those different folks at the table to say, hey, tailgating is a problem for our business because of X. This is what we have to do to implement a program, and then get their buy-in to say, okay, we're all on board here, and we'll support your efforts in doing whatever that outcome is.
Yeah, I mean, if it hasn't come through by now on this webinar, we'll say it again here very bluntly. This is a cross-functional sport, right? This is a collaborative effort. Nothing that we are doing in a vacuum. Whether that be, even if you think you're doing something in a vacuum, it is not solely a security thing, right? I'd be hard pressed to think of anything that we're doing that doesn't have a touch point with HR, that doesn't have a touch point with legal, that doesn't have a touch point with site ops or facilities or, partners, again, depending on what program you're talking about, finance, travel, meetings and events, right? I could go on and on. So you have to be able to understand that and recognize that from the get-go, so that you're not playing catch up when you're down the road with some solution that is fantastic and some process that you've come up with but you haven't gotten HR to weigh in. You haven't gotten legal to weigh in. You haven't gotten your other partners to weigh in, because they're not coming to it from a perspective of, well, let me just pick this thing apart. They're coming to it bringing their SME lens, saying, hey, you may not have thought about this. Oh, right, I wasn't aware of that. Thank you, right? Let's tweak it. HR, same thing. Maybe there's something specific with the facility itself that your site ops and facilities team is going to be able to inform you to say, hey, this is a great idea, but we need to tweak it because of this reason, right? That you may not be aware of. So I think 100% name of the game is collaborative cross-functional work with all of these processes, because again, the best laid plans, the best idea in the world isn't going to go very far if you don't have that cross-functional buy-in.
Awesome. Well, I want to get a little bit technical here in a second, because we are talking about systems, and not everything is about the program. There is a real technical challenge in what we're talking about here. And so before that, Ben, you said something in a previous conversation that we had that I just think would be cool to highlight here, about the ability to leverage data to successfully implement a global expansion. And can you talk a little bit about how you were able to do that, whatever you can share?
Yeah. So early on, building the program out, I grabbed data from even before I got there. I said, there's a reason why I'm here. There was ad hoc support provided, and you're trying to build a program. Well, give me all the data for everything you've done before I got here. And it was in multiple different places, but I was able to get it and started building the program. And within a year, I started to see we had a lot of support provided in APAC, but everybody on the team was based in California. And at the time, the company wasn't excited about putting somebody in APAC. But as I started to show the data and said, here's the growth that we have had in the APAC region over the past year and a half. And now we're to a point where 50% of the work that we do is in that region. We really need somebody there. They couldn't argue with me. At that point, it was, that makes complete and total sense. We put somebody there, and it's been phenomenal for the support of the program across the board for many years.
Is it a safe assumption that there was like a pretty substantial ROI with that move too?
Very much so. Very much so. It cut back on the amount of flights. All this stuff I brought in of how many times are we flying people to the APAC region to support this, and so I could show how much money we actually would be saving by having somebody there. And so tying those things in, whatever metrics you can tie it to, anytime you can add money to it to show the money you're saving, do it.
Awesome. So we're going to transition to a couple technical questions about integrating disparate systems. But before that, just a quick reminder, we do have the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. So if you have any questions you want us to get to, please drop them there. And we are going to save a few minutes here to get to those. So, okay, we've talked programmatically about silos and disparate systems and sort of the impact ramification that has on building cohesive programs, but easy to say that we shouldn't have silos and these disparate systems. A lot more complicated to talk about how you actually bring that stuff together. And so I'd love to talk about any success stories on how you've been able to bring data together from different places. And Mike, I'll start with you as probably the most technical person on this call. And I don't want to make assumptions, John and Ben, but probably the only person here who knows how to write code. But at least in a meaningful way. But how you think about it technically when we've got, most of our industry is made up of fairly legacy systems. And the problem is not really when we talk about the newer systems and the stuff that's cloud-based, the accessibility of APIs and making data available is kind of table stakes there. But the reality is the most of our industry is not transitioned to those types of products yet. And so how do we think about the ability to tie those legacy systems together and extract meaningful data from them that you can use for all of the other stuff we've already talked about?
Yeah, I think you bring up a number of good points in the question, right? Which is the security industry is still very much in a transitionary phase where if you look at all the rest of the business systems, because they already went through that transition of sort of on-prem server-based systems to cloud-based systems, data access is so much easier. Whereas in security, the switching costs have created that barrier that has kept most of our systems still in on-prem environments that are very disparate and disconnected. So when we try to solve for customers' business challenges, there's a couple of common themes, especially right now, right? Space utilization is a big one that's constantly being asked. And the access data is the core, it can be one of the core elements of space utilization data, which is critical to purchasing decisions and leasing decisions on space. So we spend a lot of time with customers trying to help them upgrade systems so that they can get access to that data. And then once you have the data, you need to actually do something with it, right? We don't just want to keep filling the data lake and not having any business impact. We do want to start taking that and saying, these facilities get the most traction. These facilities are trending up, right? Not just showing retroactive views, but also understanding trend analysis to see where change is occurring, right? Or, if you have increased usage of space in this zone, but decreased in this zone, and how far do we want to take that trend out into the future? Is it a short-term blip? Is it a long-term trend? Right, those types of analyses are really core to these systems, and that's really what we spend a lot of time with our customers on. Another one that's similar is cafeteria, right? So a lot of larger customers have cafeteria space, and they have staffing and food costs that go into that. And some of our customers use access data to understand how much they need to be purchasing. And they also can do it on a granular level, not just understanding on a monthly or quarterly basis, but on a daily basis, week in, week out. How many people do we expect in which zones of our facilities, so that we can understand how to staff those facilities so that we can create the employee experience without having to waste a bunch of extra money overstaffing or over purchasing. So those are the types of analyses that access and other types of security data can really lead to, because it's not just about the door. We're now starting to leverage video data to understand usage and attendance, things like that. But I think, to both Ben and John's points, everything has to be tied back to a business outcome. And that's really where we go from just being the security guards to being, partners in the business, and really evolving that conversation. So data access is a big problem, but using the data is the next frontier that we all need to solve together.
And I would guess, Ben, John, I don't know if you all have a similar program, but Meta provides an awful lot of food to its employees. And I would guess that this space utilization and occupancy data and things like that probably have very significant cost impacts to the business in terms of having a good understanding of who's in the office when and where they are.
Absolutely. I'm sorry. Go ahead, John.
No, certainly at a high level. I know, going back to something I said earlier, therein lies another issue potentially to lend itself to, besides security, is how many people are coming to our site on any given day? How long are they spending there, right? Because that informs business decisions that could potentially be made on space utilization, right? More broadly than just how many people are going to the cafeteria, how many people are coming on site? Do we need all this space? Do we need more space? What kind of space does it need to look like? Is it individual seats for everybody? Is it more collaborative spaces within the building? So absolutely. We're capturing that data, and as I know, most every other company is. What they're doing with it, I think, can vary, but it's another example of your security access control system being leveraged for other use cases.
Yeah, just a couple things here. The data, capturing the data and what you're doing with it. I like to say legal is my friend, simply because if it involves one shared service, it usually involves two or more. But legal, early on in my career, I used to look at it like, I don't want to have to go to legal. It's going to pick this apart, going to tell me no. What I started to realize was legal's keeping me out of trouble. right? I'm spreading the liability. Why do you want to own all that yourself, right? So as you talk to your partners, you're actually spreading the liability so that the company is actually looking at saying yes to things. But as far as the technology goes, I think sometimes in security, we'll build out a roadmap, but we don't include technology in our roadmap, right? What software is doing whatever it's doing now? Is there another software we have that can also do that? That this license ends in 2 years and maybe this other software may be able to take over, but also plan for, or not necessarily plan for, but be prepared to have detours and deviations from the roadmap. But technology definitely needs to be included in that roadmap of where the security program is going.
Yep. And I think, sorry to our marketing friends on the call here, but I know that I think marketing's done a disservice in our industry in a lot of ways and how we've described products. And the biggest single word I can think of is the word open. A lot of products historically have sold themselves as open and interoperable when in reality, it's just not the case, or the ability to do it is there if they want you to, or if they like the company that you're going to integrate with, or what are they going to charge you for access to the API or access to the data? And does it become prohibitively expensive? And I really like a question that came in, because I know this is something that we spend a lot of time thinking about, and it's the concept of data normalization. So the question is, should software companies be more focused on helping with data normalizing as a service? What should all these tools be doing to save time on analytics/trends and building relationships between data? And I think that's absolutely the right way to be thinking about it. As I look at how we integrate different systems together and help drive decisions, every system we connect to outputs things a different way. And they output it the way that they expect that you're going to see it and visualize it in their system, but it doesn't take into account how that data interplays with stuff from anywhere else. And so I think the first step to be able to normalize and use it programmatically is how you normalize it so that you can say, okay, this meant one thing from here and it means another thing from here, but together, this is how we look at it in a similar way. And now we can use that to drive a decision or an outcome over here. And I think without that normalization layer, interoperability is just one piece of the puzzle, but I don't think it helps solve at the program level.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of work being done at the standards layer to, especially amongst horizontal products, right? So you have OnVIF on video, you have Peacock, which is emerging in access control, right? There is a lot of work being done at the standards and protocol level to normalize data and interoperability. So I think the transition from on-prem to cloud has really raised this to the forefront amongst the entire industry from a 360 perspective, right? Customers and system providers all see the same problem and are starting to triangulate around this. But I think it's a problem that is it has a really long time horizon to full resolution, right?
Mike, do you think the incentives with the access control companies in particular are aligned enough? And I'll say, the bigger legacy players in this context, to participate in the standards, or do you think it's too concerning that participating in those standards makes them less sticky and easier to lose their customers?
Yeah, see, that's the biggest fly in the ointment, right? Is there's an economic misalignment to the standard, and so that's why I say the time horizon to resolution is going to be very long, right? And this is where I think customers and the consulting community can play a part in solving that problem, which is we have to just demand that systems have certain elements of these standards built in so that they can become interoperable and future-proofed. It's the days of saying, well, this is how we're going to do it, and we're not going to be interoperable with other systems. Everything's going to be completely proprietary from the entire vertical stack. I think that day has passed, right? We're all sort of trending in the same direction. It's just a much slower death because of the switching costs.
Fair enough. Another great question that came in for John and Ben. You all talked about sort of interplay between different departments and different folks with seats at the table, which is great. Have you seen any success in getting those other departments to share in cost and budget with any of these initiatives?
I'll go first. I think mine's a sort of a relatively easy answer. My answer, I would say, is not quite yet, but that's because we're on the the leading or the beginning stages of putting this together. I think the conversations that I've had, I can share that to say, the support and the alignment on the direction and the strategy that we're putting forth has been very positive. I think we're trending in a direction that could lead to more collaboration, formalized collaboration in the concept of maybe like an operational risk council, where you bring all the groups together that have a piece of risk. They have a different piece of the pie, so to speak, bringing them all together to really lay the cards on the table to look at where do we have overlap in risk oversight, and where do we have gaps, and where do we have overlap or gaps in whatever mitigation strategies we have. I think that can further help break down the silos and align on priorities to what needs to be addressed.
Yeah.
Ben, any wins with getting budget from other teams?
How do I want to say this? Sometimes people look at you asking for budget or as a bit of a takeover almost, right? And so you want to continue to build that partnership and relationship. And like John said, as you start to identify, put cards on the table and say, here's what we manage, here's what we support, here's some redundancies here where our teams could probably collaborate on this. Maybe then things can get shifted a little bit from one budget to another to help support that as those things are becoming more efficient. But just pushing on somebody else's budget, especially in a time that we're in now where everybody's been asked to do more with less, it becomes a little more challenging.
I think I had a unique situation going back to my corporate job when I ran security technology for Fortune 500. I had very little budget. And we actually had to get the different business units to fund our initiatives. And maybe that's when I started my journey as a salesperson. But, internally, when you've got to go out to other business units and get them to fund your initiatives, I think that's a really interesting dynamic where you have to get good at selling the mission, the vision, but also being super aligned with the goals of each of those different businesses to get them to say like, oh yeah, we see that. And by the way, here's our department's charge code and feel free to charge that to our budget. I'm not sure it was ever that friendly, but
In a previous
Yeah.
company, when I would manage the travel and the security, travel security for some of these people traveling to higher risk destinations, it was part of their cost center.
mm-hmm.
And so the supervisor or manager of that cost center would be like, do we really need to do this? Do we really need to go? And it would be their decision. But they would understand with me as a partner, here's what it's going to cost up front, right? I don't have any budget. Otherwise, I would take care of this for you. But this is how the company has set it up. And that got a lot of buy-in on, do we actually need to do this?
Yeah, and just anecdotally, right, from our side of the table, what I've seen a lot of customers be really successful working with both IT and HR for additional budget to get these things accomplished, because it is so important to the missions and the budgets of those departments, right? Being more efficient, being more interoperable, right? If you're going through an identity syndication process because you just acquired a bunch of companies and now you're trying to tie them all together into a cohesive identity management system, right? Or if you're trying to create a cohesive employee experience across this new amalgamation of different companies. We just went through this with one of our largest customers. They spent $12 billion acquiring another company and no one could get into the offices. So they called us and said, hey, we need to get this moving fast. But that is, and they had to pull budget from a couple of different places to get that done. But HR and IT are always a partner of security, and I'm seeing that more and more.
I think that's aligned with a reporting structure trend we're starting to see across the industry too, where more physical security leaders are starting to report up through the IT, the CISO, the CTO, whereas historically we've seen more facilities, real estate, legal. So I think that's actually going to be really helpful for physical security budgets as we look at that new reporting structure. Okay, we've got a few minutes left, so I just want to do the annoying part of this presentation and say, I work for HiveWatch. This is what we do. We have a platform for security operations centers to help tie disparate systems together and build a more cohesive program. We also run a GSOC as a service. So as organizations are thinking about possibly outsourcing some of the functions of their monitoring and operations, those are the two main reasons you might think about reaching out to us. Mike, what's your quick pitch on Genea?
Yeah, Genea is a 100% cloud-based open security platform. We start with access control at the core. It's everything built on Mercury. We've tied in the leading mobile credential providers as well, so that you can have a single digital credential automatically provisioned from Okta or Azure AD to an employee without anyone lifting a finger. We automatically assign all their access rights and then give you back that data and show you where it's being used, space utilization, amongst many other things. We, of course, also integrate with HiveWatch. So for our global customers that have disparate systems that need to be tied together, we can play a part in that and work hand in hand with HiveWatch to ensure you're getting the level of security and interoperability that you expect from those systems.
And I want to challenge everybody to look at that second line down that says Open API. And this is not a Genea pitch. This is something that I implore you to ask your other access control providers to help support access to your data, because it really is your data, and that's something that should be table stakes and not held hostage. With that, thank you so much to our panel, Mike, Ben, and John. Really appreciate your support and knowledge in all of this, and thank you to everybody who took time out of your day to join. With that, go have a great week and talk soon. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.